In today's video, things escalate quickly when a group of overzealous cops tries to flex their authority on citizens who know their rights better than anyone else. It starts with what seems like a routine encounter, but as tensions rise, the officers demand identification without any valid reason. The men, calm yet firm, stand their ground, challenging the officers with precise knowledge of the law. You can feel the frustration building on both sides as the cops realize they're not in control of the situation like they expected. What unfolds next is a powerful lesson in accountability and how knowing your rights can shift the balance of power. But will the officers back down, or will they push their authority too far? This intense standoff reveals the cracks in their approach and shows just how crucial it is to stand up for what's right. You won't want to miss what happens next. As the exchange heats up, the officers grow visibly irritated, repeating their demands for identification. But the men remain composed, calmly questioning the legality of the requests. One of them points out, "Am I being detained, or am I free to go?" The question hangs in the air, and for a moment, the officers hesitate, unsure how to respond. It's clear they didn't expect this level of confidence or knowledge from the citizens. To add to the tension, passersby begin to slow down, sensing something unusual. The situation feels like a ticking time bomb as the officers' frustration turns into thinly veiled threats, their tone shifting from assertive to defensive. Meanwhile, the men hold their ground, continuing to challenge the officers without raising their voices. The question remains, how far will the cops go to assert their authority, and will they realize they're on shaky legal ground? The officers begin circling, trying to find cracks in the men's resolve. One of them leans in and says, "If you've got nothing to hide, why not just show your ID?" It's a tactic meant to undermine their confidence, but the men don't flinch. Instead, one of them replies, "The law doesn't require me to prove my innocence when I've done nothing wrong." The officer's face tightens, and you can almost see the gears turning as they try to figure out their next move. Meanwhile, another officer starts taking a different approach, trying to intimidate by subtly raising his voice and shifting his posture. "We can do this the easy way, or we can do it the hard way," he says. But the men see through the bluff, standing firm. In the background, the growing crowd whispers among themselves, some pulling out their phones to record. The air is thick with unease, as the officers now seem unsure whether they're in control or on the verge of losing it completely. The tension reaches a boiling point as one officer steps forward, visibly agitated. "You're obstructing justice," he snaps, his voice sharp and commanding. But one of the men calmly counters, "Exercising my rights is not obstruction, officer." The crowd, now larger, murmurs louder, the quiet buzz of recording phones almost audible. The officers exchange glances, their frustration mounting as they realize the situation is spiraling out of their control. One officer reaches for his radio, calling for backup, while another mutters something under his breath, his hand hovering near his belt. The men remain unmoved, their composure unwavering despite the escalating pressure. The atmosphere is electric, every word exchanged adding fuel to the fire. It's clear neither side is willing to back down, and the tension in the air is almost unbearable. Everyone watching wonders the same thing. Who will make the next move? And how far will this standoff go? Just when it seems like the situation can't get any more intense, another officer arrives on the scene. This one appears more seasoned, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the agitation of his colleagues. He surveys the standoff, his sharp eyes darting between the officers and the men. The crowd watches in silence, sensing something is about to shift. The senior officer walks over and addresses the men directly, his tone firm but measured. "What's going on here?" he asks. One of the men explains the situation, laying out the facts clearly, while the officer listens without interruption. But instead of diffusing the situation, the senior officer takes a surprising turn. "You're being uncooperative," he says, siding with his colleagues. This sudden twist sends a ripple of unease through the crowd. The men stand their ground, but the stakes have clearly been raised. It feels like a line has been crossed, and the tension is now razor sharp. The question looms: will reason prevail, or will this new development push things over the edge? As the senior officer steps closer, the tension is palpable. The men, still standing firm, repeat their simple question: are we being detained, or are we free to go? The officer pauses, glancing back at his colleagues, who now look less confident. The murmurs in the crowd grow louder, and a few people call out. They haven't done anything wrong. The senior officer seems torn, weighing the growing public scrutiny against his desire to back his team. Finally, he speaks. "If you're not going to cooperate, we'll have to escalate this," he says, but his voice wavers slightly. Then out of nowhere, a member of the crowd steps forward, a lawyer who had been quietly observing the entire exchange. "Officers, I'd advise you to reconsider," she says confidently, holding up her phone, which has been recording everything. "You're dangerously close to violating their constitutional rights, and I'm more than prepared to take this further if necessary." The officers freeze, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. The senior officer takes a long breath before finally stepping back. "You're free to go," he mutters, his frustration evident. As the crowd cheers, the men exchange knowing glances. Just as the tension seems to dissolve, the lawyer turns to them with a small smile and says, "You handled that well, but next time, call me first." It's a twist no one saw coming, and it leaves everyone with a powerful reminder. Knowledge of your rights can turn the tide, but sometimes having the right ally can make all the difference. As the situation de-escalates, the crowd begins to disperse, their conversations buzzing with what they've just witnessed. The men thank the lawyer for stepping in, appreciating her calm but decisive intervention. "We stood our ground, but having you here made all the difference," one of them says. She smiles and replies, "It's not just about knowing your rights. It's about holding those in power accountable." The officers retreat to their vehicles, clearly frustrated but aware they'd gone too far. The senior officer throws one last glance toward the group before driving off, the weight of the encounter likely sinking in. The men, now alone, reflect on what just happened. "It's not about picking fights," one of them says. "It's about making sure we're treated fairly." As they leave, the lawyer's words echo in their minds, and maybe the minds of everyone who watched. Knowing your rights isn't just important, it's essential.